11, the West Point School Board has fired a French teacher over a transgender controversy. The superintendent claims that French teacher Peter Vlaming was insubordinate by refusing to use a transgender student's preferred identity pronoun. Karina Bolster has been at that hearing all afternoon and has the latest from West Point.
Peter Vlaming worked for West Point Schools Division for 7 years. During testimony, Vlaming said he cares for all of his students, including the one in question, but added in good conscience and faith he couldn't use the male pronouns with this student. Students and community members line the hallways of the school, some in support for Peter Vlaming and others in support for the transgender student. Vlaming's attorney, Sean Voiles, argues his client has rights as a teacher.
The student is absolutely free to identify however the student pleases. The school board, though, adopted one viewpoint and then required Mr. Vlaming, at the cost of his job, to repeat that ideology, to repeat that viewpoint. That's where that's compelled speech. That's where it violates his First Amendment rights that he does still retain as a public employee.
This issue came to a crux during a virtual reality exercise back in October, where Vlaming says he called out, quote, "Don't let her walk into the wall," as the transgender student walked in that direction. Vlaming claims it was a slip of the tongue.
I'm totally happy to use the new name. I'm happy to avoid female pronouns so as not to offend, because I'm not here to provoke.
That was, in fact, discriminatory because all the other students were being used pronouns, but this student was not being used pronouns.
Following this incident, Vlaming was placed on paid administrative leave after the West Point principal said Vlaming did not obey his directive to use the proper identity pronouns. An investigation was launched by the superintendent, who moved forward with a recommendation to fire Vlaming.
That discrimination then leads to creating a hostile learning environment.
The policy speaks not one word about pronoun usage. There is absolutely nothing in the policy, as the witness has admitted from the school division, that speaks to that issue, which makes that policy so problematic. It leaves it completely up to the interpretation of individuals.
In a statement following the board's decision, the superintendent stated the school board does have policies that prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender identity.
This is a new issue in this country, and these administrators had just 2 words that were added to their policies: gender identity, and they decided on their own, what does it mean to discriminate based on gender identity?
Voiles says he's assessing all his options at this point, including an appeal with the circuit court.
Out of West Point, Virginia, that's where a teacher who refused to recognize a transgender student has been fired.
Our Brendan King has been following the story for us all evening. Brendan, what can you tell us about the situation?
Yeah, it was a long hearing, I can tell you that. Tonight's hearing was an inside look into a personnel matter that's most often behind closed doors, but the teacher, in danger of losing his income, asked for this public hearing. Hours later, he received an outcome that he pretty much dreaded.
And even higher than my family ranks my faith.
Like reading a sermon out of the good book.
I hope you perceive the absurdity of this.
This West Point High School French teacher fights to save his job.
We are here today because a specific worldview is being imposed upon me.
The proceedings Thursday were a trial of sorts, absent of a courtroom, including a swearing in of witnesses like the teacher in question, Peter Vlaming.
And during this 8th period in mid-October, I had 4 or 5 students in my classroom.
The school board says Vlaming violated their non-discrimination and harassment policies when he refused to call a rising 9th grade transgender student who identifies as a male as he and him, telling the principal back in October,
"I've had a slip up," and he went on to describe what had happened. He goes, the student was participating in an activity, almost walked into a wall, and I yelled out, "Stop her."
And by failing to follow the directive, he was therefore discriminating and therefore creating a hostile environment.
The teacher's lawyer argues that his client cannot be forced to say something that violates his conscience and his beliefs as a Christian. The public hearing started at 3, and 5 hours later,
all in favor?
Aye.
A unanimous decision. Vlaming was let go.
The fact that I'm being asked to adopt a new ideology on who we are as humans.
I asked the sole provider of his wife and 4 young children, a teacher at West Point for nearly 7 years.
Was this worth it? Was this fight worth it?
There are some hills that are worth dying on.
The school system says this was textbook discrimination, treating one student different than another. Meanwhile, Vlaming's picture is already off the school website. He has just 10 days to appeal. Candace.
Chairman votes aye. Mr. Jenkins.
Aye.
And with that, a West Point teacher who refused to use a student's preferred pronoun is terminated.
8 News was first to break this story for you 2 days ago. French teacher Peter Vlaming says while he believes in the students' right to express themselves, he says using the pronoun is against his own beliefs.
Our 8 News reporter Sarah Fox joins us live from West Point High School with the details tonight. Sierra.
Teacher Peter Vlaming is fired from West Point Public Schools. The public hearing inside these doors lasted 4 hours, and the school board met privately for 1 hour before making that final decision. West Point High School French teacher Peter Vlaming is now out of a job. All 5 school board members followed the superintendent's recommendation that Vlaming be terminated.
Miracles can happen, but I was prepared that this might be the outcome.
This after Vlaming said he would not address a transgender student with their preferred male pronouns. He says he loves all his students, including this one, but it's against his Christian religious beliefs to call a transgender student he instead of she.
My religious faith dictates that I am to love and respect everyone, whether I agree with them or not, because we are all made in God's image. I am also aware of and agree with speech limits that are placed on public school teachers concerning matters of religious faith.
The school division says Mr. Vlaming repeatedly refused to comply with the adopted school board non-discrimination and non-harassment policies. Both sides also admit that Mr. Vlaming slipped up a few times and accidentally used female pronouns instead of preferred male pronouns.
I can't think of a worse way to treat a child than what was happening. That was very threatening.
Vlaming's attorney says the school division's policies are unconstitutional and not clear when it comes to gender identity.
And they decided on their own, what does it mean to discriminate based on gender identity? Even the own law that they described as the law, but it was actually an outdated Department of Education letter, said that harassment required intent to harass, actually ill intent.
Vlaming's attorney tells me they have 10 days to appeal. After that appeal, they said they're open to all options, even taking this case to federal court. 8 News was the first station to break this story, so stick with us for the latest details. Reporting live tonight in West Point, Sierra Fox, 8 News.
All right, Sarah, thanks so much. And the school superintendent issued a statement after that decision was made. She said in part, quote, as superintendent, it is my responsibility to enforce board policy, and due to Mr. Vlaming's noncompliance, I therefore recommended termination. She also says there won't be any more comments because of possible pending litigation. Now, as Sierra said, the story first broke right here on 8 News. Of course, stick with us as the story develops and possibly moves through the court system. Of course, when we're not on air, you can get all the updates online and also with our 8 News app.